Okay. One final note on a few of the characters in V for Vendetta. Like I said before, it's through the arts that a lot of characters find meaning in life, and particularly central to the formation of the character V is his neighbor in cell 4, who was Valerie, who you come to find out was rounded up because she was a lesbian, she was an actress. These are typically things, that conservatives don't like. People in the arts, I guess, typically lean towards the liberal. And this conservative party rounds up Valerie and, throws her in a jail cell. Now, at first V thinks, at first Evie thinks that V is making up the story, and you come to find out it's absolutely true, and that's where the Crimson Carsons, the roses, come from. So that's another example of how the arts are, extremely formative. Even with Evie in the Shadow Gallery, which is surrounded by art that was liberated from the hypocritical government, the arts are extremely important. They're fundamental in V. He quotes literature constantly. So I did want to point that out. I also wanted to talk about Finch for a second. Finch is the Irish detective, or half Irish detective, who, I don't know if you're aware, but the English, the word cracker is kind of like the N word for non-English whites that they came up with during around 1300s, because they had conquered and subjugated and enslaved, the Irish and the Scottish, as well, not to the degree that they did Africans, but they did have Irish and Scottish slaves, and, murdered and, committed genocide against them and whatnot. So he's considered, a half-breed, kind of a minority. And Finch is interesting because, he joined up with this cause because he wanted to reinstate order as well, but along the way, he develops a conscience and doesn't agree with the way, things have happened, and, feels a great guilt about it. And Finch goes on this, kind of empathy LSD ride, and is able actually to conceive of, V's entire plan. And V knows this, and it is Finch that ends up, in the final confrontation with V. And, Finch has the opportunity. Miss Hire tries to use him. She's the woman who's white, white hair, very pale. Tries to use him in the way that she'd used her former husband and try to use Creedy. Tries to use him and get him to step in place of Adam Susan as head of, everything. He does not. He goes and he walks off. And, so that's kind of an interesting choice for that character to make. There's also, these themes that pop up throughout, like the theme of patterns, and we see it in the fertilizer bomb that V makes, and there's kind of a madness to his pattern that Delia, the doctor who was in charge of, the female doctor who was experimenting with patients on Lark Hill and also felt a conscience about it. There's a pattern that both she and Finch see, and they're the only two characters who really empathize with the people who were detained in the concentration camps. And they were also lovers, Finch and Delia. And Delia's, it's funny because Delia's name's a flower, and, she gets given the Crimson Carson when she's killed. So these are some, little side characters, to look at here and there. There's also this kind of, like I said, a theme of predation, and we look at Evie, and it's implied that maybe Evie's father wasn't so innocent after all, like the movie makes out, that Evie's father may have molested her, and she's always looking towards V or Gordon, the TV guy, for a who ends up being her lover. And keep in mind, she's only 16, and he's like 50. And so there's always this aspect of Evie getting kind of predated upon by these older men. And, V, though, does not do that. I mean, I guess he does torture her, and he acts as like a father figure, but he's grooming her to take over because he sees in her the the ideal government and society that's going to rise up out of the ashes of his anarchy. He even discusses the idea that anarchy has two faces: destruction and rebirth. And those are just a few of the little side characters that I wanted you to take note of and to watch. But, this thing is extremely complicated. I mean, it's complex. I mean, you can pick through this comic forever for the literary references and musical references and things of that nature. I mean, there's aspects of it where, colors get associated with certain characters, and then when you switch scenes, some of those colors linger on and make connections between other characters, and you can compare, Rosemary Almond, to Evie and to Miss Hire, and even to Mr. Hire, in the way that they kind of prostitute themselves. You can compare Adam Susan and V, Adam Susan and Evie, Evie and V. You can make all these kind of connections and comparisons if you pay close attention. And but that's it for now.